Well, every good dad joke, I've learned this from being a father. Every good dad joke needs to cause physical pain.
Yes. Right.
Welcome to the Three Wise Men of Divorce, Money, Psych, and Law podcast. Sit down with the California divorce experts, financial divorce consultant Mark Hill, marriage and family therapist Pete Roussos, and attorney Shawn Weber for a frank and casual conversation about divorce, separation, co-parenting, and the difficult decisions real people like you face during these tough times. We know that if you are looking at divorce or separation, it can be scary and overwhelming. With combined experience of over 60 years of divorce and conflict management, we are here for you and look forward to helping by sharing our unique ideas, thoughts, and perspectives on divorce, separation, and co-parenting. So I've got a joke, guys. Why does a divorce cost so much?
Tell us.
Because it's worth it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some
what do you
people,
think?
No. I'll tell you why I jokes like that make me a little bit uncomfortable. First of all,
it should make you uncomfortable actually, because it's kind of an irreverent, inappropriate joke.
Well, and I know the two of you very well, and I know how first of all, I know how kind and compassionate and committed you are to a healthy divorce process. And I don't have any doubts whatsoever about that. And we've talked a lot about how divorce is, one of the most gut-wrenching and painful things that a person can go through. But I do wonder about somebody who might be tuning in for the first time.
And I hear that.
Who doesn't have a sense of us and why we're doing this, which is all about how to have the healthiest possible divorce process.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, people come at our divorce process from different places.
Yeah.
And some of them are willing to have more of a sense of humor and be more irreverent about it than others. I've had people that come in with the divorce cake, which is like the groom being pushed off the cake by the bride on the cake, and there's like severed head and blood.
Yeah.
They think that's hilarious. And if I were to show that to another couple, they would see that as something really offensive.
Yeah.
And so we get people, and there's reasons why it is offensive. And people come at us from different places, and we have to meet them where they are, don't we? Yeah, that's a good point. But
having said that, it's a pretty good joke.
Well, yeah, it is actually. The thing that's scary about it, there's some truth to it. I mean, there's a reason why people are willing to pay these untold amount of money to get their divorce done. It's because they need to get out of their marriage, whether that's good or bad. They need to get out.
Yeah,
I have to tell you my divorce cake story.
Oh, I want to hear it.
Shared it before. Did a very high dollar, high profile divorce case. At the end of it, the wife said, it was full collaborative, full team. The wife said, I want to take the whole team to dinner. So we go to this fancy restaurant in Del Mar. It's a big table set up. And in the middle of the table is this 4-tier cake with the decapitated husband on the top and the sauce dripping down across the different layers of the cake. And
red sauce dripping down? Like
red sauce, yeah.
Oh,
and she's holding the decapitated head of the groom in her hand on the top of the cake. And so everyone shows up. The full team shows up. The wife is there. Husband shows up late, comes in, sees the cake, and goes, "Oh, there we go. All the hostilities out there on the table. With you. Now we can have a nice dinner."
So was that a collaborative case that you did?
It was a collaborative case, yes.
Yeah, so they were they had that emotional space because they did it collaboratively, where they could have that kind of irreverent joking that may have some layer of truth in it.
I think she was making something of a point, but at the same time, because he was the one that wanted the divorce. But at the same time, it allowed a little more space for us to operate because of that,
Yeah.
Was the cake at all, Mark? Did it have a slightly bitter flavor? I'm curious.
I don't recall, but I have a photograph of it to this day. That's on my phone that I'd be happy to share with everyone.
What is the ancient Klingon proverb that revenge is a dish best served cold?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
But what does take so long in divorce then?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the reasons it costs so much is because it takes a long time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And why does it take a long time?
Well, from my standpoint, I've got a very narrow focus at the start of a case, which is to try to understand what the pie looks like, what's going to be needed to be divided, both in terms of income and expenses and assets and debts. And I always tell people, we don't have a case. You got nothing going. We can't do anything until you've completed those mandatory court forms and exchanged them. Basically, I've got to get statements. I've got to get data. People have to engage in that process. And often what we find is that one is more motivated than the other. So one person, because they decided years ago they want to get a divorce, they just told their spouse. And so they've been thinking about this. They're ready to go. They'll get the statements, overnight. But the spouse who's still processing the fact that they are getting a divorce can often be very reluctant to engage. And the problem we face is that these documents can age out. In other words, the court forms require them to be within a certain period of the time they're signed as to how old the statements are. So if you've got one person dragging their feet and the other person engaged, the frustration level of the person that did that work can escalate to the point where it can actually make it more difficult to even have a case.
How do you both answer the question? I imagine you're asking a lot. How long will it take? How do you field that question?
Well, there's a legal answer to that. There's a waiting period, so you start there. Once you filed it 6 months before you can be divorced, not that you have to be divorced at that point.
That's at least in California.
In California, yes. Sorry,
yeah. Just a little.
Thank you for pointing that out. And beyond that, I say, well, it's pretty much up to you.
Yeah, I always tell people there's no cookie cutter that fits everybody the same way. I do have gross averages. Most of my mediated cases are about 6 to 8 months to complete. And a collaborative case tends to be a little bit more than 12 months. But everybody's different. And I always say my world indoor record was 25 minutes.
Yep.
They came in, they knew what they wanted. It was the college divorce where all they had was a car and some student loan debt. That was easy. In 25 minutes, we were done. And then I had the case that's gone 6+ years. In fact, it's still going on. It's one of the cases that Mark and I pull our hair out over. And there's reasons for that, and they spend an enormous amount of fees and an enormous amount of time. And it's a fairly complex financial case. And I think what made that case in particular take as long as it's taking is it's also very emotionally complex. The dynamic between the parties is so unbelievably toxic that, and they've got brilliant coaches that are working with them, but it is just, you stop and start, you stop and start, you stop and start. You think you're on your way to something, and then somebody brings up something new that's just a zinger at the other person, then it blows up, and then you got to start over again.
And all our documents keep aging out.
Yep.
And we have to redo it, and then the cost goes up. So,
well, and they do things also that make it take longer, like this continuing to use joint assets.
5 years down the road, they're still using the same account.
Like, separate your money already, but that's taking that causes it to take longer. And it's not like I have some people where they continue to use joint assets, but they're just kind of cool with that and they don't even care. And they'll just wash it out at the end. Right. They don't want to do all the math. But these people want to sharpen their pencils and do every transaction. And well, that means that Mark has to go through bank statements for years and years to
And I come up with a number, and then this case goes to sleep for 9 months, and now all the numbers are out of date.
But here we go again.
Yep.
So, but I think, and that wouldn't happen, Mark, on that case if it wasn't for the family dynamic, would it?
No, this would have been settled before they moved out of town, frankly.
Yeah, and then I had a couple this morning that I met with, and she was weepy, and she got on the call before he did, and she was really kind of weepy about it. And she's like, I'm very emotional about the case ending. I think that's part of why I don't want to do my forms.
Yeah.
So there's a thing going on there where she's kind of dragging her feet, and he's dragging his feet too, because it means that it's finally over. I mean, you see that, Pete, don't you?
Sure.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm just thinking, in all the years I've been doing divorce work, have I ever had a case where the partners were coming in and operating at the same sense of pacing? And the answer to that is no. And I've only had one case, and it was a collaborative case, and one of the parties had no ambivalence whatsoever, no second guessing about the need to divorce. They were so done, and it actually was, I think, pathological on their part. Every other divorce case that I've worked, there's always been a level of ambivalence, certainly grieving. I mean, when I hear you describing what that person is describing, she's talking about a grief process.
That's exactly right.
And I think it's really important that be part of the work that is ideally happening in a divorce process.
Well, it was interesting, Pete, because I asked her, I'm like, well, are you having second thoughts about the divorce? Because I don't want to push a divorce if they're thinking they want to stay together.
Right.
And she's like, oh, F no,
Right.
she it's not like she's having second thoughts about the divorce, but
there's grief.
There's grief, and it's still taking her
some
time to be willing to finish it.
Yeah.
Even though she doesn't want to go back.
Yeah, so ambivalence doesn't necessarily mean second thoughts. It can be a desire to avoid the finality. Even though a person in an intellectual way, they can understand it's the right thing to do, it's a healthy decision, there's still that sense of loss, and on an emotional level, I don't think I've ever encountered a completely bad relationship. Every marriage that I've ever encountered in my work, every divorce case that I've ever encountered, there is the good stuff that's there. There's a wisdom that brings people together, and sometimes that wisdom fails and a marriage ends. But when a relationship ends, when it started with love and a relationship ends, there's always a grief process. And avoiding that or denying that, I think, is one of the things that is the core cause, if you will, for people that then get stuck after divorce in moving on. Makes it more likely that they're going to repeat mistakes in subsequent relationships.
Well, and you're not going to divorce differently than you were married.
Yeah.
You're still the same people. Sometimes I'm like, you what did you expect this person to, get a lobotomy? They're going to change who they are. Once you filed the petition, they're going to stay the same person.
Mm-hmm. I say to people, wouldn't it be unreasonable to expect the divorce to be any easier than the marriage would be? And they always nod. They get it when you put it in those terms.
Well, it is interesting. You can get married very quickly.
Yes.
But getting divorced, unwinding that marriage. I mean, we've all done the case with, the 1-year divorce. I've got a couple of those right now, and they're taking a terrible amount of time to unwind, just a year.
Yeah.
And so we have people that have been together 30, 40 years. That's not something you unwind easily.
Right.
Well, so I think that does then beg the question. Maybe if we turn the question around, let me ask the two of you. So what is it that you tell people they can do in order to move their process along more quickly?
I think number one is do your homework, finish your tasks. I have
Your
a philosophy.
deliverables, as one client.
Yeah, we have one client says, what are my deliverables?
And then he never delivers anything.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
It's true. Yeah. Well, it's the same list that we gave you last time. You didn't deliver anything.
Yeah.
I think, and now I lost my train of thought. Finishing your task, finishing your homework, getting it done. I always tell my clients, and maybe this is bad customer service, but it's a reality. I, as the practitioner, won't and cannot work harder than my clients.
Mm-hmm.
I'll meet them halfway. If to the extent that they're willing to move forward, I'm willing to move forward. But if they don't do what they need to do to move the case forward, it can't move forward. There's nothing I can do about it.
Well, I realize that people don't know what they don't know.
Well,
but I'm
that's
curious,
true.
how do people who've never gone through a divorce process before, I can imagine when you guys are explaining to them what is required of them, what their deliverables are, what their homework is, I can imagine that most people are maybe surprised by that.
Well, and sometimes their eyes glaze over.
Yeah, people hate filling out forms, number one.
Well,
I mean, I hate filling out forms. I get it. Okay, I understand.
Mm.
You never feel like the form quite captures who you are. It seems impersonal, and it's a pain in the butt.
Well, and these forms are detailed. They require the use of your prefrontal cortex
Yep.
in your brain, right? The logic centers of your brain. But if you're in a fight or flight place, or you're enraged, or you're terrified, how easy is it, Pete, then to pay attention to details?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or you're resentful, and
Right.
you basically don't want to give the other person what they're demanding, and so you drag your feet. Then it's the person that comes into alternative dispute resolution because they believe if they can delay the process long enough, the person on the other side will come to their senses and come back into the marriage.
I do know this. People sometimes think, well, litigation will go faster. And that is not the case.
Yeah.
You take a litigation case and you multiply the time by 3, and that's
the cost by at least 3.
And that's probably close to what would happen. And the wheels of justice at the courthouse turn extremely slowly.
Well, and I imagine that they don't have less homework in a litigation process.
They don't, and maybe even more. Yeah. And just to get a trial after you've done all of your disclosure and your discovery, and you told the courts, we've done all the discovery, we're ready for a trial, let's go. You will get a date a year out, maybe longer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's so many cases, and you're one of 1,000 that this judge is thinking about. And so thinking that the court will get you, like getting your day in court is somehow going to move this along. Now, where the only thing I would, maybe a friendly amendment to this whole concept, is that sometimes you have to do court because at least it will move forward.
Yes. Yeah.
There are those cases where they just get stuck and they're in a swamp and they just sink, like they're walking through mud and they don't move. What happens when you do that? You just sink. Sometimes those people, I'm to the point where, it's unethical for me to continue with you because you never continue your commitments. You never get, you can't reach agreements. It's like Groundhog Day. We're doing the same thing over and over again. I feel like it's unethical for me to continue to take money from you. You should just go to court and it will be resolved there. I mean, that's one of the benefits of court. I can resolve just about any issue, but the drawbacks to court is it's expensive and they can't be very flexible. They have to apply the law the way that it's applied, and that's it. Whereas what we do, we're more creative and outside the box.
When they tell you have to be there, you have to be there.
No, and you better be there. Yeah, the court can hold you in contempt.
Yeah.
The court can fine you.
One thing that I find is delays cases is what I don't know. In other words, in these longer term marriages, we come up against things that I can't get statements from institutions more than 5 or 7 or the most 10 years back. So we often have situations where we just cannot give the data that would normally be used in the process to determine separate property assets, for example. We just can't get the statements. Nobody's fault, just can't get them. Okay. So there's that aspect to it. There's also things like they bought a house they've got a case right now. They bought a house in 1993. Well, in 1998, the tax laws changed to mean that you could own a house for 2 out of 5 years and then get as a married couple, up to $500,000 excluded from gain. But if you owned a house in 1993 and you bought a condo that you rolled the profit in from in 1984, now you got a situation where I cannot tell you what your basis in the property is, and the IRS will tell you, well, it's zero then if you can't prove it. Now, no one's going to do that. So until I get the data, I don't know what the issues are. And Shawn can't know what the issues are to have a meeting and to go through what do you guys want to do about this?
Well, I've had that conversation with the frustrated client that's like, why can't we just be done? I'm like, well, you're not ready to have an intelligent conversation yet about this. We've talked about this before, Mark, the concept of agreement readiness.
Yes. Yeah.
That the case will not settle basically until the case is ripe enough to settle. And that a big part of that is having the data, having the information so that we can speak intelligently about the issues. And sometimes things are just complex and it's going to take some time to just muddle through that. Yeah. And so there is a little bit of patience that people need to have. And sometimes I'm telling people, it's not going to happen. They don't understand how thorough the disclosures by law must be to prevent them from having huge problems later. So that gets to be, it's universally loathed, the disclosure process. Mm-hmm. No one loves to fill out disclosure forms, but they must be done. Even if you think the other person knows about it already, and even if both of you agree, you still have to do the disclosure and declare an penalty of perjury. Well,
there's real potential risk by not doing it accurately.
Yeah.
You say, oh, I've got this separate property stuff. That's mine. She knows it's mine. I'm not even going to put it on the form. Well, how does that work, counselor? If something comes up later, some kind of disagreement.
Well, you can end up having the MSA, the marital settlement agreement that you worked so hard to negotiate, you could have it set aside because something was forgotten. Worse can happen is you could have sanctions. You could lose the asset.
Yeah.
We've talked about the lottery case before where the woman bought a lottery ticket and didn't tell her husband that she won. And then he figured it out later after the divorce was already finalized. She didn't put in her disclosures and he got 100% of the lottery winnings awarded to him because she was a bad girl and didn't disclose. So I'm always telling people, you've got to take this as serious as a heart attack because the court does.
Yeah.
So, there is some stuff, there's tasks that have to get done that are time consuming. The faster you get the task done, you get the data to your financial specialist or to your mediator, the better, because then it can get done faster. Most mediators and financial people have methods to help you get it done quicker. And then we can get to a place of agreement readiness. Now, another place I think blows cases up and makes them take longer, Mark, is this. What do you think of this? They try to negotiate something that has been very difficult for them to talk about. That's why they've hired a professional mediator, and they choose to negotiate it themselves at Denny's.
Yeah.
And how does that usually go?
Usually we get a call the following day saying that was a disaster, and we're back to square one.
We're more angry than we started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we have that case where she left him on the side of the road. They got in the car together and drove somewhere, and then she
threw him out of the car on the freeway. Yeah.
She left him out of the car on the side of the freeway and drove.
They were on the way to an appointment for their child who had some mental health issues, and we told them take separate cars, but no.
Yeah. So I always tell people, if you want to negotiate things on your own, that's great. But if you even sense a slight amount of blood pressure increase,
stop.
There's a reason why you've hired professionals. We know how to help you get through this, managing the emotional responses. And let us work with you. Let us do what we are paid to do to help you get this done. Otherwise, it will take longer because you'll have blow-ups.
One of the things that I like to ask clients who are thinking about having that kind of conversation is, I like to ask them, well, tell me what gives you confidence that you're going to be able to have that conversation effectively and appropriately?
Oh, it's a brilliant question.
I love that, but I also ask them, so have you ever talked about this before?
Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How did that go?
How did that go? Right.
Oh, it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
She threw a hairdryer at me.
Right.
Well, that's why you do it at Denny's, because usually there isn't a hairdryer
No,
in reach.
you do it in the bathroom, not in the kitchen.
Yes, yeah.
This hairdryer is not knives that
Mhm.
fly across the room.
Mhm.
That's like that scene. You remember The Sopranos? And there was the scene where I can't remember her name, the wife, Carmela,
Yeah.
told Tony that she wanted a divorce. And so they go to their favorite Italian restaurant where everything happens in this show, right? And she tells them she wants a divorce, and that conversation didn't go very well. She's like, I want what I'm entitled to, and he's like, you're entitled to something. You know, he used some expletives to explain what she was entitled to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean that it often doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, if it were easy, it would be, there wouldn't be an industry surrounding it, which
maybe that's why divorces are expensive, is because they're hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's some work that has to be done. So maybe saying it's worth it, I mean, that may be true for some people, but maybe the issue is the reason you're willing to pay the money to the professionals to help you is because this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
having people with credentials and experience who've seen a few divorces, I usually tell people, I think I've seen a few more divorces than you have. I think I've been involved in a few more. Well, I certainly hope you have.
Right.
And so my 20+ years of experience doing hundreds of divorces a year, yeah, I've seen some things, and I know what will work and what doesn't work. And you don't know the questions you don't know to ask. And then bringing in other professionals, I am an attorney here, but bringing in a financial professional and a mental health professional to bring in additional experience just adds more to that, so that people can be done more quickly. Now, another thing I've seen, guys, when you have sometimes you have a person that's going faster than the other person, right? You mentioned that earlier, Pete. And do you think this is what I've observed. I think it only goes as fast as the slowest person.
I would say a little faster than the slowest person wants to proceed.
Yeah,
I think
Because we do push them along, but at the same time, we got that case, Shawn, that's been going on for forever. Where finally the wife gave us some dates for the final meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way
she would
that
disappear for months on end and not respond.
The way that I'll describe, because that question is always asked, is it's going to move faster than you to the person who is slower, if you will, in their adjustment. It's going to move faster than you probably wanted to, and to the other person, it's going to move slower than you wanted to. Yeah. And that actually, I think, accommodating those pacing differences is an important part of the collaboration that's necessary in a healthier divorce process for them to understand that.
Well, there's the emotional readiness, but also we often have what I call the non-moneyed spouse, the person that can take care of the money during the marriage, and he or she needs to get up to speed to be a participant at the table. Mm-hmm. And so even once the disclosures are done and we know what the pie looks like, I might have to have a conversation with someone about, your spouse's benefits and, what their income really looks like when we take into account all the little perks they get. That no one comes out of the womb knowing how this works. And it's complex. And even CPAs don't understand how divorce works, as we have found many times. What's appropriate for the IRS may not be appropriate for the courts in divorce. And that's shocking to some people.
What? You mean I don't get to remove depreciation from my income?
Yep.
In a divorce, and that's right. Yeah, it may work for the IRS, but it doesn't work.
And the fact that your car and your cell phone and all your children's cell phones are put through on your on your company, that doesn't necessarily work for divorce.
Yeah. And then kind of Also, sometimes slower is faster. I know if I try to do a job really fast that is intricate, I'll screw it up. And then I have to go back and unwind something. So yeah, I mean, we want to be efficient, but sometimes going too fast, and I've seen that, will trip you up and make the case last longer.
Well, I wonder about cases that you've had where, because I think the risk that you're just describing, Shawn, I think of it in terms of really getting out in front of a grief process, and how troublesome that can be. And I'm wondering, this is the scenario that I wonder about, where it comes time to sign the MSA, and what is it that drives buyer's remorse, and how unresolved grief or grief or incomplete grief can, I think, drive that kind of ambivalence.
We have that case right now, Shawn, right? You talked about it earlier today.
Where there's what our colleague Nancy Ross calls negative intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Parties kind of become addicted to one another in their relationship. That's how relationships work. And so if they can't have a positive connection, they'll have a negative one. Mm-hmm. And so we might be on the threshold of signing the final marital settlement agreement, and then someone will throw in some horrible thing or some monkey wrench. And I don't think it's even conscious. I think they just do it. And then what it does is it prolongs the process, because then I get to have a connection with this person. And you'll call them on as well. I don't want to be connected to him, but then they do things that force them to be connected.
Yeah.
I'm kind of speaking your language, Pete. Am I making any sense?
No, absolutely. And so it's interesting, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about something you said earlier vis-a-vis a litigation process. You were talking about how the court can apply sanctions, and so what incentives, if you will, do you have in a process other than the withdrawing from a case because it's stuck, that situation that you described earlier?
Well, I mean,
how do you motivate people? Well, how do you affect?
There is the specter of the other person is going to be fed up and go to court, and these are the bad things that can happen to you at court. But there's also just what would your life be like if you could go to bed at night without worrying what the other person is going to do next?
And that, as one who's been through divorce, the only one at the table here, that is far more debilitating than I would even admit. I know that going through a very challenging divorce, I was having real trouble sleeping. Finally got it resolved. Guess what? I sleep like a baby. It's really interesting, although I would have denied that was the cause, but it was.
There's, we talk about, in terms of negotiation, going back to that book, Getting to Yes, and they talk about the best alternative to negotiate agreement and the worst alternative to negotiate agreement, having that kind of being bookends in your understanding of the case, making sure you have a clarity about your botna, the best alternative to a negotiate agreement, and your watna, the worst alternative to negotiate agreement. But there's another concept that's also very important. It's called the NAN, N-A-N, your negotiated agreement now. And what would happen in your life? Why would that be something that you would want in a negotiated agreement now? Maybe you're giving up something that is below your best case scenario or worst case scenario. Maybe it's different than what your attorney's even telling you should be asking for or entitled to, but you're buying your peace. And there's no attorney, no financial person that can figure out exactly what that's worth to you. But it does have value. And so thinking about that, what is that value to me? Is there something I'm willing to leave on the table so I can be done?
And interestingly, that is rarely a conversation that's had early in the process.
You're right. And we should do it more.
We should do that more, because what tends to happen is people can become entrenched in the divorce process. And they can focus on things that I mean, we have a case right now where there's some issues that need to be addressed, but wife could not focus on the immediate demand to get the documents in place or get the documents to me, because she was so focused on this other wrong that she perceived to have been, wrought upon her, which actually we all agree she was.
I think it's tricky though, because I think that done, if that conversation is had prematurely, it can come across to clients, I think, as though we're encouraging them to negotiate against themselves. And what I've seen the two of you do very adeptly, I think, in cases, is to have the conversation with clients that goes something like this. Well, you could take that position, but let's talk about what it's going to cost you financially in order to maintain that position. To literally do it, I've heard the two of you talk about it in terms of a cost-benefit analysis, and broadly, these conversations of, do you want to win the battle and lose the war? Mm-hmm. And I think that the timing of that, and I think it's sad, but I think it's a truism that sometimes there's a level of pain or discomfort that clients have to go through before they're ready, I think, to really face that kind of choice dilemma.
I think that's true. Or this question. I know that's a very important principle to you.
Yeah.
Is that a hill you want to die on today?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when I've got the data, I can quantify it.
Yeah.
And that's something that often doesn't happen. They're fighting over a concept, but it's only $300 in a, $2 million case.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so true. When we say that, is that a hill you want to die on today? I think of my father, who was a veteran of the Korean War and fought at Heartbreak Ridge.
Wow.
And it was really, the whole point of that battle was just, can we get a little bit of real estate?
Yep.
And then they end up losing the real estate anyway.
Yeah.
And so what was the point of all that death and carnage? Mm-hmm. Now, hopefully there's not death and carnage in people's divorces, but
there's damage.
There's damage, and there's collateral damage.
Exactly. There's damage that goes beyond the couple.
There's victims beyond the couple, like especially if you have kids.
Yeah. And other family members, Yeah.
So, think about that.
Grandparents' rights.
We sometimes say, well, it's the principal. What our principles are expensive.
Yeah.
So how is this bridge that you're fighting over, this hill? Is this really something that you're willing to lay it all there?
I had an issue with real estate where a guy who sold me the real estate lied. And I was incensed and went to my business attorney and was just complaining about, it cost me $26,000 to repair this, and he lied about this, and it was obviously leaking before. And I said, it's the principle of the thing. And my attorney's, oh, Mark, please, she goes,
don't talk about principle.
We have a broken system. You will win this case, but it might cost you $100,000 in experts, and the judge may just decide you have to eat that. It's like we have a broken system. And so making clients aware of the fact that you go to court, it's not Al Pacino and Justice for All, folks. It is a situation where, depending upon the mood of the judge, who the judge is, how well educated the judge is in terms of family law. And we know sometimes people are just doing their 2 or 3 years in family law before they can move on and be judges where they really want to be judges. There are some excellent family judges who really know what they're doing, don't get me wrong, but there's also those others who are just transitory. And they will decide your case. And as I walked out of court one day, I was violated by this process. It's exactly how I felt. So,
well, guys, maybe we should kind of summarize where we've been here. So the things that slow the case down are many-fold, right? So one is clients that got to get their homework done, or it's going to take longer.
Yep.
That's one. The other is sometimes there's just kind of emotional reasons that cause there to be blocks, which could be one of the reasons that we prevent, people don't get their homework done.
Yeah.
Or at the end of the case, things get strung out. The other is using joint resources longer than you really ought.
Yep.
I also thought about using the court system. That makes it take longer.
Yeah.
And then the standing by a principle that it's not the hill you should die on.
And what I would add to that, and you referenced the emotional piece, but I want to be even more specific.
Please,
Shawn, is denying and not facing the grief process that is inherent to divorce.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. There's always some loss. No matter how difficult the marriage became, there is always a loss.
Yeah.
And you feel that loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I might add another one, and that is feeling like it is going to work for you to impose your will.
Mm-hmm.
Because that usually slows it down. It's kind of like when I first got a puppy and tried to take it for a walk. And I pulled on his collar, and he's like, "You're pulling my collar. I'm going to sit down."
Right.
And I think people aren't much different.
Mm-hmm.
So helping people see that it's in their best interest to actually move.
Well, I think the way that I will talk with people about that kind of dynamic that you're describing is, I literally will say, I think you both have learned the hard way that you can't get the other person to do something that he or she doesn't want to do. And so how is it that you think in this process you're going to be able to exert what you want or to behave unilaterally? How do you expect that to go?
How's that going to work?
Yeah.
They'll just do it. It's the right thing to do.
No, and I think that sometimes there's an expectation that the professionals involved are going to land a kind of either authority or a force.
Yeah.
That is
assigning
going to
magical powers
something
to us.
Yeah.
You're my attorney. Can't you make this happen?
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're not magical. Smart, yes. Magical, no.
Mm-hmm.
And, the reality is that when financial resources get cut in half, lifestyles change.
Yeah.
2 households cost a lot more to run than 1 household does.
Yeah. And that's
hard. So expectations coming into it and entitlements. I'm entitled to this. Somebody told me I'm entitled to the marital standard of living. Well, that's the first half of the sentence. What does the second half say? If it's available, and I'm paraphrasing, but it generally isn't available.
Well, and marital standard of living is one of 15 factors.
Right. Yeah.
The last factor being one that you always point out, Mark, anything the judge thinks is important.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've had people say, well, it sounds like you could do anything. I go, bingo. Now you understand. Can we negotiate, please?
Yeah. Well, anchoring slows things down too. I mean, if you anchor on a concept that you only have half information about, that can screw you up. All right, guys. Well, we did it again.
We did indeed.
Hopefully the people listening are getting something out of this. We know you're out there and we appreciate you.
Yes, indeed. And if you have questions, please reach out to us. We'd be delighted to address any issues that you are concerned about during the divorce process. Bring us your questions.
And at the very least, guys, with today's episode, at the very least, if they use it judiciously and with discretion, they got a good joke.
Exactly. Yes.
They got a good joke out of this.
Oh, I would say a mediocre joke at best.
You're so hard on yourself.
Well, every good dad joke, I've learned this from being a father, every good dad joke needs to cause physical pain.
Yes. Right. And long groans.
Mm-hmm.
We need to start timing the groans on.
My dad used to say, "Ooh, that's a double groaner." All right. Well,
okay, guys.
If they had questions for you, how would they get a hold of you?
Peter.
My website, peterroussos.com. That's PeterRoussos.com. The contact me on that website.
And my website is packdivorce.com. short for Pacific Divorce Management, PACDIVORCE.com. Again, we have a contact form and a lot of useful information on there regarding divorce.
And if anybody wants to get a hold of me, likewise, my website, WeberDisputeResolution.com. That's Weber with one B, like the grill, dispute, like we had a fight, and resolution, like we solved it.com. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Three Wise Men of Divorce: Money, Psych, and Law. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share with others who may be in a similar place. Until next time, stay safe, healthy, and focused on a positive, bright future. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Every family law case is unique, so no legal, financial, or mental health advice is intended during this podcast. If you need help with your specific situation, feel free to schedule a time to speak with one of us for a personal consultation.